Would the IRS sound better with tube power amplifiers? Great question, and it comes from Emil in Belgrade, Serbia. My question is, would the IRS sound better with tube amplifiers on them with the same power or worse, or does it matter? Greetings from Serbia. Thank you. Serbia is a country I would love to visit. It certainly looks gorgeous in the pictures that I've seen. You're lucky. That's a good question. So these speakers, these IRS loudspeakers, were designed in about 1985, probably earlier than that because they started out as the IRS 3 I think Arnes started at Infinity designing these things in the very early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And the IRS 3 were the first that ever came out. And they were all designed on tube amplifiers. For the entire life of the IRS series of loudspeakers, the founder, Arne, and Carrie Christie, and Harry Pearson, and the few who own these, I mean, you know, there were 58 pair made, period. And we have a pair. The vast majority, all of those guys that I mentioned, and the vast majority of people, listen to them on tube amplifiers. They were designed on tube amplifiers. They were glorious on tube amplifiers. Mike Kay, the wonderful Mike Kay, good friend for many, many years before he passed. He was the owner of Lyric Hi-Fi in New York City, down on Lexington Avenue, and I don't think he has those anymore. No, in fact, I know he didn't. I met the guy that bought them off of Mike. But anyway, all tube amplification. So we know that the IRS sounds terrific on tube amps. It's a fairly resistive load, which tube amps like, because they have an output transformer that doesn't particularly like swings in impedances, which this kind of speaker, which uses planar ribbon drivers, really is kind of like a magneplanar in that it's a fairly resistive load. So perfect load for a tube amplifier. So yeah, these would sound terrific on tube amplifiers. I know that for a fact because I've listened to them for years on tube amps. Now we don't use them on tube amps because we make our own amplifier called the BHK Signature, designed by Bascom King, who actually was in on the beginning of these and designed the Infinity reference, the IRS servo system, worked with Arne. He was his right-hand man for, God, ever since Infinity started, actually. So, and Bascom, Arne, and I now prefer the IRS with our BHK solid-state amplifiers. And that's the first time that has ever happened. And I remember the first time that Arne, before he passed away, unfortunately, but Arne, first time he heard BHK's great contribution in an amplifier was at his house, and he just shook his head and said, well, after 50 years of owning vacuum tube amplifiers on everything I ever did, I'm switching. Give me a set. And we got him a set of BHK 300s, the monoblocks. Now the reason that was so, and it's the only amplifier in the world that Arne ever had that was solid state, and we did a number of tests between the Big Sonic Frontiers, between some audio research, and the BHKs beat it. Now, I'm not pounding the drum for BHKs, I mean, because they're a terrific amplifier, but Bascom, of course, has designed many, many amplifiers and a lot of tube amplifiers, some of the best in the world. But Bascom came up with a way of putting the tube where it belongs, which is in a BHK, in the input stage. So, and the output stage mirrors the sound of a tube, the way he did it, which is very special, using all MOSFETs of a single sex. Not to sound weird, but MOSFETs and bipolars come in what we call, just lovingly, different sexes, but they're different polarities. So there's N channels and P channels, and almost all designs out there are full complementary designs, meaning that the positive half of the waveform is handled by an N channel, and then the bottom half is taken over by a P channel, which is called complementary output stage. And that's 99.9999999% of all solid-state Class AB or Class A amplifiers use a complementary output stage. Very rarely do they not. And one of Bascom's theories was that the reason that solid-state amps don't sound like tubes, which he loves as much as I do and Arnie, is because tubes don't have different sex, right? They are one, you know, if you're going to build a tube stage, there's no N channel tube and P channel tube. There's just one tube, and it's more like an N channel, right? It just operates on a positive voltage. So Bascom said, if I'm going to design one, I'm going to mirror that and use only N channels, and he came up with a really trick way of doing that, and that's what's in the output stage of the BHK, and it's driven with a vacuum tube on the input, and that's why on this system, with these amplifiers, I would always prefer to have these BHK solid-state amplifiers. But otherwise, if you own those and you didn't have that amplifier, by all means, connect up a vacuum tube and one with a lot of good headroom and power, and you'll be as happy as a clam. I hope that answered your question. Thanks for asking it, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.